All right, we got a full moon in Aries on the 7th. And while we are out of eclipse season right now, the energy of the eclipse is still with us. And we are seeing it occurring all over the world as the rise of authoritarian leadership is taking over alongside citizens pushing back in various ways. So, as I've said before and will continue to say, this is a time of massive change, which means it's also a time of chaos. And so we've got to learn how to work with chaos so it does not completely work us. And this is exactly what the astrology is signaling to us as well right now. So let's break this down as we have a full moon that is illuminating for us exactly where authority lies and where our responsibilities are as a collective to either push back against that authority or give it up once more. So let's get into it. This is the weekly forecast for October 5th through 11th. Full moon in Aries, what I'm calling what's the strategy to combat authority. All right. So welcome back to Yakking with the Stars, the show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the stars, planets, and zodiacs, and a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. I am your host and guide, Nicole Rouse, a storyteller that comes from a line of storytellers who weave and tell stories in many different ways. And here I work with astrology and ethnography to explore the stories of what it means for us to be human. Because right now the present is up for grabs. So who is leading the stories that will bring us into our futures? Now, every Sunday, we check into the chaos that we call society and ask two pressing questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, build, or reflect upon, right? And it's been a time, y'all. It's been a time, right? It has been a goddamn time. So let's get into it in the show today, all right? So before I get into the kind of weekly forecast and stuff, I want to make a couple of announcements, especially if you're in the Chicagoland area. So we are now in October, which means that we are in what they call spooky season. And I'm going to take my ass outside to do a little spooky things. So if you're in Chicago, I'm having a few pop-ups, astrology pop-ups. I will be doing mini astrology readings at two events this month. The first is going to be on the 16th at Nobody's Darling. It's a 40-plus queer mixer. So any kind of queer coupling you can think of, if you're over 40 and looking to mingle with others, come on out on the 16th. There will be this hosted by Before Sunset and Cookies and Conversation, and I will be doing many, again, astrology readings along with leading an invocation because Forrest will also be DJing. So Forrest Brooks, if you are on IG, goes by Jungle 915. So I'll have that information in the show notes at the end of the show. And then on the 19th, a few days later, I'm going to be at another queer party, Funk Stick, over at Jackhammer on the north side. And that'll be from 6 p.m. till about midnight as well, doing pop-up astrology readings there. Okay. And then on the 21st, I'm going to be at Dorothy Downstairs to be hosting the first of 5 Queering Chaos conversations that is part of a larger Queering Chaos project that I am currently working on. And in these conversations, we're going to be looking at pressing issues and examining them, talking about them, and conjuring with them through a queer lens, okay? And so we're going to kick this off by queering the idea of spirit and spirituality. And so I'll be in conversation with 4 amazing Black and brown queer spiritualists. Charlene Kemala Bruja, who's an Apetabi and also a reader. Reverend Kim Crutcher, who is an herbalist, minister, and therapist. Tristan from Tune In with Tristan, who is a body worker and part of the collective, the queer collective Slow Mo in Chicago. And J.T. Perry, who was a hoodooist, mystic, and writer, who was also one of the co-founders of Chicago Hoodoo Society. And it is October, so it is also Hoodoo Heritage Month. So happy Hoodoo Heritage Month, y'all, out there as well, to those who practice and come from those lines. So come on out on the 21st of October at Dorothy Downstairs at 7 p.m. And we'll be starting these conversations. I will be talking with the panelists about what does it mean to work with spirit and spirituality, particularly in this moment, and doing so through a queer lens, okay? And I'm really adamant about this. I wanted us to start moving these conversations, y'all, because right now we are still being fed the same type of authority and the same type of authority head, even if we're calling it progressive or conservative. It still is being framed through mainly a straight, cis, cis male body, usually white in nature. But even if they're not white, this idea that a cis straight male perspective and authority is somehow going to get us free doesn't make any sense when that is the same perspective that has gotten to this mess time and time again. So we really need to start moving our lens in sight about who and where we are looking to for not only analysis of the present moment, but also taking that analysis and putting it and embodying it so that we can figure out different types of actions, right? Just because you diagnose a problem does not mean the problem is then going to be solved. That is only one part of it. But we are fed the idea that once we quote unquote know, the knowing is the doing. No, it is not. It is docility. That is the way Western knowledge production trains us to understand even action. It sits in the mind. This is why I talk about embodiment so much. So I want to be able to kind of queer all these conversations, queer the way we understand revolution, queer on how we understand change, because we must not sit outside the norm. And so one way we can start that is queering our understanding of spirit, because if what the colonial project did was sever us from ourselves, our land, our ancestors, then one way that we push back is to take what was stolen, which means we got to come back into the spirit. So we got to come back into the self as a way to connect to the land and those who we come from. Okay. So if you're interested in learning more and being part of the project, this is going to be part of the documentary. Please come on out to Dorothy Downstairs, 7 p.m. And audience members will be part of the conversation as well. Okay. So that's my little spiel on that. And as well, if you are still interested in getting a reading with me, a one-on-one reading, I am running a special through the end of October. So any of my 1-hour readings are 35% off till the end of October. Just use the code FALL when you are checking out. It's all done online through my website, okay? And finally, if you're here watching me and you're on my Patreon, I want to give a shout out to my patrons. Again, it has been my Patreon that has been feeding me literally this year as I've gone through, as all of us have been going through massive changes and this kind of fluctuating economic market. So I want to again say thank you to everybody who has support and continues to support my work. And if you are interested in supporting my work, please join at a tier. It's tiers start as low as $5. And what that $5 tier does is it helps me be able to keep producing this show weekly. I'm enjoying this show. I'm enjoying combining my understanding of astrology with my anthropology as an anthropologist and as a trained anthropologist, and also as a storyteller and somebody who really does love ethnography. And I miss the field. So this is kind of the way I can get into the field and also contribute to a different perspective that I think a lot of us need to be contributing to so that we kind of shift and remake the landscape of who and what we listen to. Okay, so the Patreon helps me do that. So please consider joining at $5 a month if you can, and the higher the tiers are, essentially the more engagement we get. I do listening salons, conversation salons, and also bi-monthly divination study sessions. We've been going through astrology and we're going to move it from astrology into numerology and other forms of divination, always coming back to astrology as the base so that we can understand and see the ways that humans have always tried to make sense of the sacred and mundane through pattern recognition. And if we can see pattern recognition through various systems, then it allows us to get more comfortable in how we recognize patterns for ourselves. And so through the divination study sessions, it's really a way for folks to learn what systems work for them so that they can learn to recognize the patterns in their life. So you actually start to trust yourself. So divination is a practice that can help you trust yourself by trusting your intuition. And it is that grounding in the self that actually creates the communities and the societies to say we want. So we got to flip these kind of scripts that we've been fed in society of, this idea of community and up. You have to start with the self in order to find community and sustain community, because community involves selves coming together, not individuals trying to perform scripts that keep us all confined to the same power structures over and over again. And this is really a big part of what this astrology is saying as well, y'all. So let's get into it, okay? So we got a full moon coming up on the 7th. Today is the 5th as I'm recording this. And it's going to be at 14 degrees in Aries, okay? And so a full moon means that the moon and the sun are in opposite signs of one another. So since the moon is going to be in Aries, that means the sun is going to be in Libra. Now, At this time, when they have full moons illuminate. Full moons make things that are bright so we can see through the darkness, okay? And so the things that may have been hidden to us now are more prevalent, now are more available for us to examine. So I want you to think back to around March 29th of this year. That was when we had the new moon in Aries. Where were you at? What were you thinking? What were you doing? Okay. Aries is ruled by Mars. Aries is action, it's the head, it's the one who starts things off. It's the beginning of the zodiac. It's a cardinal sign. It's masculine. It's fire. Okay. It is the action orientated nature of Mars, the planet of strategy and war and aggression and power, right? But Mars really is a strategist at the end of the day. I want you to remember that when we talk about Mars, it is a strategist. And there's different ways we strategize based upon our experiences, right? In the location we are at and understanding who we are up against. So when you have back in March, you had this new moon in Aries. What were you planting? It was also a solar eclipse, right? So there was a lot of things occurring at this time. Think about what was you planted now 6 months later. What has been more revealed to you that now makes more sense about what you were thinking about 6 months prior? That's one way you can work with the energies of full and new moon cycles. Even though the moon cycles very quickly through the zodiacs every 28 and a half days, when you're trying to track from full to new moons based upon the zodiacs, that's really a 12-month process. You start the new moon, 6 months later, you get a full moon in that sign, and then 6 months after that, another new moon in that sign. So you can track the kind of placements and energies and patterns of your life in different ways with the moon. Okay, and let me know if that makes sense. So what I'm saying there. Now, we're having to illuminate some things. And if we think about collectively what was going on in March, a lot of the kind of beginnings of, and I'm using the US as an example of the Trump administration and what it said it was going to do since he came into power in January. And then by March, he was already picking up speed and really making those 100 days show just how much he was going to weaponize and use that power of that presidency. And if he had to overstep that power, he was willing to do so, right? So now we're 6 months since that new moon. What do we see? What's been illuminating? What and who do we believe? Okay. Now, this is important right now because the sun is in Libra. And when the sun is in Libra, it's considered to be in fall. Why is that? Because when the sun is in Aries, it's exalted. And since they are sister signs, y'all, if the sun is exalted in one part of the sign, of the sisterhood, then in the other sign, it's going to be in fall. The sun doesn't do supposedly as well in Libra, that because instead of focusing on the self and it being about the self, Libra requires compromise. It requires understanding various sides. It requires an understanding because it's the only zodiac sign in all the signs that is represented by a inanimate object. It's the scales, right? And so the scales of justice require a kind of quote unquote objectivity, but that objectivity cannot be devoid of humanity. So when I talk with Libras, especially heavy Libra placements, I always say, you got to make your body, you got to make yourself the center of that scale so you don't lose yourself in trying to find balance. This goes for society right now. We have got to make the self the center of those scales right now. Does it make sense, y'all? In order to understand what a true balance looks like, because if not, and you remove the human, you remove the self from the balancing to understand what is justice, what is relationships, what is peace, any of this, right? Then you run the risk of making everything neutral, and neutrality will always favor the current power structure because it makes you docile. And so this full moon is really illuminating that, y'all. It's illuminating the fact that if we do not own our heads, if we do not own the head by owning the body, the moon is the body. Remember that the moon represents the body, our emotions, and the materiality of being human, because the sun is the ego. It's the drive, right? It's the passion. It's what ignites the body. But the body must be first centered, and we understand the body through the emotions, okay? Through the emotions. Does that make sense? So when we talk about this moon in Aries, I've always said this, the most emotional moon signs are not water moons, they are fire moons, baby. You are burned, burning through. Fire and water create what? Steam. You got to let it out. This is why people say when you have a fire moon, you can pop off sometimes or you feel things deeply. Nothing's wrong with that. You just must learn how to work with that steam, because steam can also bring what? Clarity when it is used properly. But if you let that shit get too hot, right? Steam can actually kill you. It can burn you. It can literally melt your skin off. I want you to think about that when we think about the head, okay? And this idea of feeling things, this idea of knowing things. Who do you believe when you fight yourself, right? When you go against the balance that you know to be true in favor of compromising for other people who do not see your humanity because they cannot see themselves. So you're trying to balance something that is already out of balance. Who does that end up hurting? Oppositions breed tensions that we must then face. Attention is not a negative, y'all. Attention is what we need to be able to go through, right? It is being illuminated for us in the dark, because it is through the dark we find what? Our light. So we have this full moon in Aries, right? That is illuminating for us this tension between compromise and the self, the tension between ideas of justice and relationship and culture and art. This is really important right now. Culture and art are vital right now, because the war is not being fought on the ground necessarily only. It is being fought ideologically across many of these Western nation states, because the nation state itself is under attack and is not sustainable. So what these states are doing no longer is not necessarily just fighting against one another. They're having to fight internally. They're having to fight internally the citizens that they must now control in order to still maintain that state. So how do you do that? You cannot fight just through coercion all the time, y'all. You'll run out of resources. The best way to fight and maintain power is through the mind, through the culture, through who controls the narratives about what it means to be a citizen of said nations and representation of that right now. That's why I said back in, what was it, March? Who was folks who were following me since I started the show, when Neptune went into Aries, this is a time of the rise of the cultural worker. It is a time of the rise of the cultural worker, but cultural workers aren't just always progressive. You can be working the culture of what already is because you think that's going to somehow save you. Okay. So we're being illumination of even the types of understandings of culture and the balance between that and ourselves, right? Our bodies, our sense of self. What actually are we being called into action to do based upon what is being illuminated from us, right? From these ideas of justice and relationships and money and all of this, like, if it's not working for us, then why are we still working for it? These are questions that are being asked. Now, why do I say this? This is because we got to also see what's going on alongside this full moon, because what's also going on in Aries. We got a few things that are already in Aries currently. One is Neptune. Neptune is now retrograde, is at 0 degrees, and it's going to be there before it dips back into Pisces pretty soon. But at 0 degrees in Aries, and Neptune is drying out, it's saying, okay, I have taken and dried out the stories of the state, right? Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. Neptune is the deep waters. It's the stories, it's the origins, it's the mysteries we cannot know. It's where the dead resides, down the bottom of the ocean. Okay. And so when we're talking about Neptune, it becomes the glamour, it becomes the foundation of structures that maintain. It is the stories that we believe in, it is the stories that we are fed, it is the ways that we buy into and are glamored by these so-called origins, right? That's coming up to the surface, up to land, being dried out. So who has your head? That is what is being illuminated alongside Chiron, the wounded healer. It's also in Aries, retrograde as well. So what does retrograde mean, y'all? Retrograde means there's an appearance that it is kind of staying still or going backwards. But for us, it is a reminder that we have to review where we come from. It is not just a steady, constant, progressive forward motion that we are fed as the only way time operates. The cosmos reminds us that everything in life has to go through a life and death cycle, and everything also needs time to stop, pause, review, and reflect. That is a natural, quote unquote, thing of the universe. that we are told to constantly push back against in these structures and systems that cannot live up to its own reps. So we are now being asked to review and reflect because we are being shown, we are being illuminated exactly the foundations of these states. So who do we believe and why? And we're having to realize that in order for us to buy into these states, we have to buy into our own subjugation. Chiron retrograde in Aries, there will be a collective wounding of the self, of understanding who we even are. Do you know who you are? Do you know who you are outside the scripts put upon your body? If I told you you could not identify yourself based upon who you were told you were, but you actually had to express who are you, could you do it? And if the answer is I don't know or no, what happens if you don't judge that answer? What happens if you allow that answer and got more curious with it to guide you into an understanding of knowing? In order to do that, you got to take back time. You have to literally own your own head. You have to stop, review, and reflect. You can't just keep going. You can't just keep doing. You just can't keep reacting. So this full moon is illuminating also our concepts of time and how we work with time, right? Why do I say that? Because Saturn is in Pisces, but it's only around 27 degrees. So there is going to be a little bit of influence because it is having a conversation still with Neptune, right? Saturn rules time, it rules tradition, it rules authority. And as I've said before, I see Saturn as the great crone who finally got washed and can be reemerged as the great mother, asking us to really review and reflect upon the traditions that have gotten us in which we are not been mothered, we have not been cared for. We don't own our own sense of self. So if we can't own our sense of self and these timelines don't make sense, then Saturn being the great crone that owns responsibility, tradition, and time is saying, you got to shift and remake these goddamn stories, going back into the deep waters of Pisces for the collective, right? What do we believe in and why? Because Pisces is the sacred. It is the sacred that allows us to understand our mundane, our sense of self, our health, Virgo, the opposite of Pisces, right? So we're in this tension. We're in this tension of who and what do we believe and why, because we are seeing exactly what the authoritarian state will do. It will double down on its stories. We're reviewing and reflecting. Again, Neptune is retrograde in Aries. Now, the outer planets are in the conversation. So, as Neptune is also part of this because we're in a full moon in Aries, well, Neptune is in a conversation with Pluto and Aquarius and Uranus and Gemini. Both of those are retrograde too. So, we are literally seeing the ways that collectives are being asked to buy into origin stories that are requiring us to go against our own sense of self and knowing to believe this shit. Who do you believe and why? Right? Who do you believe and why? And so because of this, then we have to then do a little bit more hopping around the chart. So we got Aries conversating with these outer planets. We have it overall opposite the sun in Libra. So then we got to look to see then where the ruler of the new moon of this full moon is. So since Aries is the ruler of the full moon, so we're going to have a full moon in Aries, and then we have to look to see what rules Aries, which is Mars, like I said earlier. Well, where is Mars right now? Well, shit, Mars is over in its other sign that it likes to be in, that it is ruled by Scorpio, or that it rules, Scorpio. And we have not seen Mars in Scorpio for a long time. Mars has been having to go through signs that it does not necessarily be most comfortable in, having us to reflect and review upon very uncomfortable aspects of our society that we like to move against, which is namely our understanding of care in the family. This is when Mars was in Cancer last year, in the beginning of this year for a very long time. If people kept talking about, it's passive aggressive, it's in detriment. Again, as I say, somebody who's Scorpio rising, ruled by Mars, Mars is in Cancer, trine my ascendant, right? There is a way, yes, there's going to be an uncomfortableness of Mars being in Cancer because Mars will then demand actual care when it is in Cancer. It understands the strategy and the necessity of having nurturing and care and home and roots, right? That is a foundation for any strategy to take root from, to grow from. So there's going to be an uncomfortableness when we don't value any of that shit, right? We don't value actual care. We don't value family. We don't value mothering. I'm not talking about it in a gendered way. I'm talking about the understanding of mothering, nurturing, and care that provides the family structure. We don't value family. So with Mars being in Scorpio, right? When Mars being in Scorpio, yes, Grace, definition of care became, that's exactly what it was supposed to do. I'm glad you said that. The definition of care became clear when Mars was in Cancer, and that is one kind of output of Mars in Cancer transit. We had to get really clear about what the hell we really need. Right. And a lot of, and I listen, some of us really do need healing, sexual healing, familial healing, right? Child healing. That's needed. That's necessary. That's part of being human. So now with Mars in Scorpio, okay, Mars is in Scorpio. It is the ruler of the full moon, is in the other sign it likes. We are being asked to get more strategic about what it is that we need and then going after what the fuck we need. Right? This is definitive. This is decision making. This is cutting through the bullshit because Scorpio is the butcher. Scorpio gets to the root of things. Scorpio understands that either it can sting itself, but if I don't want to die, then I might as well turn around and sting your ass. But I sting your ass with what? Depth, knowledge, and truth. I go into the underworld, in the other underbelly to resurrect something new, death and transformation completely. So what needs to die, y'all, in order to be reborn? Look to your Scorpio house. Look to your Scorpio house. What is being illuminated, right? Aries house is going to tell you where in your chart this full moon is having the most impact, and then that Scorpio house is going to give you another aspect of it. What also needs to go through a death and rebirth? There's a strategy for you to be able to enact what it is you need to enact for your head, for your sense of self, to be actually actualized. Okay. And it's not an easy process because there is a death and rebirth happening over and over and over again. And it can feel exhausting. Yes, that's why we need stamina. Mars in Scorpio gives you stamina. That's also really important to understand about a Mars in Scorpio. Mars in Scorpio energy is the athlete who can do multiple sports. It's the one who understands the necessity to be well conditioned so that you can last, because you never know how long the war will go for. Does that make sense, y'all? So this is about stamina. Where do we need stamina? Where do you need stamina? That's also where the Scorpio house is, can give you information, but also where you're going to have a little bit more stamina to have, especially during this transit. Okay. But that's just because you have stamina. Don't forget other people will have stamina as well. So this is also going to be a battle of wills. And we have Mercury going into Scorpio the same day that we have this full moon. So also expect people to be popping off at the mouth a little bit. There may be a butchering of things being said, people cutting through the bullshit. Okay. There is a sharpness to the tongue when Mercury goes into Scorpio, but now that Mars is also there and they will come together, we'll talk about that next week. Okay. When they do come together, there's going to be there can be a bit of a powder keg. So this energy is not love and light. This energy is reality coming to light. Okay. The reality coming to light, because it's still, we're having talking about the moon. So besides your Scorpio house, since that is what is where the Mars is, that is the ruler of this full moon, we also got to look to the Cancer house. Why? Because the moon rules Cancer. Okay. So if we look to your Cancer house, then you can also see where there is an abundance of illumination occurring as well. Why do I say that? Because Jupiter is currently in Cancer. Now, when Jupiter went into Cancer a while ago, I talked about this. People talked about how it's going to be so great because Jupiter does hates being in Gemini, and it loves being in Cancer. So people were kind of loving lighting this transit. And I said that doesn't make any sense. One, because of the current moment, but two, the minute Jupiter went into Cancer, it was squaring Saturn and Neptune in Aries. The matriarch squaring the patriarch. What are the ways that we have been fed stories of nurturing and care of the family through structures and systems that value patriarchal leanings, and what needs to be broken from that? That square was ushering in a year-long examination that Jupiter was going to make abundantly clear about the philosophies, the structures, the systems, and the laws, because Jupiter rules those things, y'all. Jupiter rules structures and laws. This is why it was the governing kind of planet for the Roman Empire, okay? It is a structure. It talks about law and philosophy and spirit and all that. Whatever the ways that we have been taught that about family and care and home and nurturing through a patriarchal lens that does not actually benefit us. What are the stories that need to be rewritten about that? So now that we have this illumination of Aries and Libra, right? Justice and justice, right? This idea of justice, this idea of relationships, this idea of culture, this idea of who owns culture, right? Where does culture reside? How the state is using the family through this kind of nuclear lens to keep us docile, to keep us in these scripts. Jupiter is expanding that and is saying, what is our philosophy on this shit? Again, what do we need for care? Right? And with the Jupiter in Libra, so if you have a Jupiter in Libra, I got Jupiter in Libra as well, right? There's a way that the philosophy around balance, the philosophy and structures and laws, right, around kind of justice and relationships and structures of economies, because money resides with Venus itself and articulates itself in Libra through the marketplace, okay, marketplace of ideas and culture and things like that, right? The economic system of a society will also dictate many times the ways it treats its citizenry in terms of socially and politically. I talked about this last episode. So if we operate under a racial capitalist system that is built upon a plantation economy in which the foundation of that goddamn economic system is dehumanization, you have to dehumanize populations in order to make them commodities that can literally be traded and sold on the marketplace. Well, then your philosophies, your laws, your culture, right? What you value will then reflect that economic system. So your economies do matter because that has an implications of your morality. And if you live in an amoral, immoral kind of economic system that predicates itself upon a dehumanization while also claiming to be the bastion of democracy and freedom, you must then believe the way in which that structure and system is defining all of those terms. Right? And if they do not match the way you are defining them, then you have to move the story. You have to move the conversation. You have to move the definitions. Illumination is happening. Jupiter is expanding everything in Cancer right now, asking us to ask ourselves, what structures and systems and philosophies around care do we need? Right? What is that? What do we need? Right? And right now we are seeing what the state will provide us, not a goddamn thing, and tell us to do more. Right? So I want you to look at your charts, y'all. Look at where Libra and Aries reside. That is what's going to be illuminated, all right? This kind of tension and relationship between compromise and the self, between your understandings of justice and relationship and economies and culture and all of these things, and how that relates then to how you show up in that, your own authority, your own head, and where you may be quote unquote triggered. But that triggering is needed for you to come into a new sense of self. And then look to your Scorpio house, because that is also being impacted since Mars is there. That's where you're going to get some more stamina, but also you might be a little bit sharp. You might be a little bit angry. You might be a little bit in wanting to have the fight. There must be a strategy to your words. There must be a strategy to the ways in which you move. So you must be in the body and allow those waters to flow. Scorpio is the deep waters that are bounded. Make sure you are not binding yourself and your emotions. Make sure you are flowing through it so that they can talk to you and help you understand where you are in this present moment. And then look to your Cancer house to see then where you do need to reevaluate nurturing and care and empathy and all of that, and where Jupiter is expanding on that. And so I'll give you myself as an example. I'm a Scorpio rising. So this is impacting my sense of self, the first house, my sixth house of health and work, right? And open enemies. That's the sixth house stuff, and small animals. Got a house full of goddamn small animals, y'all. I came in here with two, not even mine. Now there's another one. It is, and I hope there ain't gonna be more. They're lovely. But it's the shit gets real, right? And that's also then hitting my ninth house of Cancer, which is the house of education, philosophies, higher self, higher learning, right? And all of that is in play right now. And I want to actually turn now to how we're seeing this in society, because for me, there is a way that I now feel prepared enough to finally tell my story in higher education about the ways in which I experienced that space and why this present moment is not that shocking. But we need to be shocked into the reality that if we do not push back against the ways the state is going to manipulate education and knowledge for its own will, making us more docile to it, to open itself up of authoritarianism, then we are sitting ducks. And so this is something that came to me the past couple of weeks. As I know Grace said in the chat that you feel like you're dying again. Yes, I feel like, there's a constant kind of death and rebirth going through, because society wise, we are in a death and rebirth cycle, y'all. All the outer planets have changed signs. Now they're all retrograde. All the outer planets signal transformation. They just do it differently, but they all require transformation. Transformation requires there be some kind of death and rebirth process, whether it be a physical, a metaphorical, a spiritual, whatever it is, right? There must be space made. If energy is neither created nor destroyed, then you have to transmute. So this is about alchemy and conjure. We are in a time of alchemy and conjure right now. And I look at it's October, spooky season. Might as well work with the energy, y'all, right? We must alchemize. And all conjure is bending reality. Conjure is bending reality to a different will, to your will, to the will of another, because the universe operates in its own time, as we say, universal timing. Yes, that's cute and all, but sometimes the way the universe operates does not sit alongside our material needs as humans. This is why we have the ability to conjure. This is why I said the body is the first technology, and we are being asked to understand our bodies. Aries, full moon, also Chiron, the womb ding. When we take back what was stolen from us, which is the body, there is a way then we can turn on this inherent technology that the state always understood. That is why they sucked it from us in different ways through the economic system of racial capitalism. You cannot understand the state if you don't bring spirit into it, y'all. They are not separate entities. They are in a conversation, but the bifurcation of it allows for us to bifurcate ourselves. Therefore, only then seeing one way to do something. Right now, we got to put it on the fucking table. It's got to be on the table as a different way to engage with what is going on right now. And for me, this is where this kind of full moon is illuminating, right? A wounding for me is my sixth house of Aries. There's been a massive wounding when it comes to work and health for me, especially when it comes to work and health and working not just for myself, but working in institutions, right? And this is related to the fact that my Mars is in the ninth house in Cancer. So it has been institutions of higher education, education itself, that has both raised me, but also been done the most kind of damage to me. And this is not a story that is unique to me. I know there's plenty of people who talk about the ways they go into institutions, and you may go in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but then you come out completely drained and torn up and burnt out, and you feel as if you could have still given more, so somehow it is your fault. And it might take you years to realize actually it wasn't your fault. You just got played. You kind of bought into a script, into a game that was never yours, but you needed to be a chess piece in it. So then how do you work through that shame, that guilt, that irritation, that self-deprecation that we are so used to doing, right? That we have to give up. Virgo, South Node, these last 18 months. We are all having to reevaluate the ways in which we talk to ourselves and about ourselves, because we have been taught to only see ourselves through a negative light, through a critical light, especially if you occupy the quote unquote margins of society, or the perceived marginalization of society, because your marginalization is needed for your continued subjugation. All right. So all of this shit's on the table right now. And for me, I had to go through these past 5 years of all kinds of ups and downs as I try to make sense of what occurred to me, what happened to me in higher ed, especially in these Ivies. And then right now, to see the ways that these institutions have bent the knee so quickly, not only was it infuriating, but in a fucked up way, it was vindicating. Because I realized it wasn't about me being right, but I wasn't goddamn wrong. You know what I'm saying? It ain't about being right, but when you realize you weren't wrong, then it's like, bitch, now strategies at the table. Now there's a whole new strategy deployed. Let me open my mouth and cut through the bullshit itself. So I'm working on my book. The book has been worked on, but now I understand that this is the book that I need to write. So if you're on the Patreon, I will be talking more about the book project for my own accountability, but also because there's also finally clarity. Aries, full moon, illumination, what needed to be illuminated from the dark that can now come to the light that can be healed. I want you to think about that for yourselves, y'all, okay? This shit is real. Astrology and transits are real. Because when we take it from the individual and pull it back out, to the kind of more structural, right, then we can see exactly just how unwell society is and how they need to keep us sick and ignorant in order for us to buy into this nonsensical shit. And again, we're seeing it right now with the way that higher ed bent the knee so quickly, as I was saying before. So what do I mean by that? Well, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how the Department of Education under Linda McMahon, right, literally strong armed and put a chokehold on these institutions by saying that they were not going to give them federal money for the grants and for various grants and scholarships and stuff unless they essentially paid a fee to the state. And these Ivies that purport themselves, especially Columbia ain't shit. Columbia purports itself to be a bastion of student activist training and the leader in all of these kind of newer disciplines, one of the first ones to bend the goddamn knee. And then Brown followed next. Brown, one of the ones that always purports itself to be the most liberal of the Ivies. That's exactly what they said, how they marketed themselves when I first got there working for them. Even the students, the staff, well, it's not as bad as the other places. It's more liberal here. Bent the knee as well. Harvard's about to make a deal. So you have all of these institutions bending the knee and paying because you're being strong-armed by a bully, and then you're saying that that's academic freedom. Well, now, because they didn't believe their oppressor, we don't believe our oppressor, y'all. Just because you can diagnose the problem does not mean that you actually believe the problem. Just because you can diagnose the problem does not mean you can actually believe the problem. I sound like Dr. Umar right there. Ooh, the child. Ooh, child. Let me back up. Do you see what I'm trying to say, y'all? You know what I'm saying? Like, diagnosis does not mean that you're actually doing something. So they didn't believe their oppressor. Or if they did, they wanted to go along with it and act as if they couldn't do anything but go along with this administration and this regime, right? Because once you open up yourself, right, it sure is, bro clock is right more than twice a day. But he broke, so we're gonna see about what he got at him next. Anyway, so what was I saying, y'all? Oh, back to the compact. So when you don't believe your oppressor, okay, when you don't believe what they will do and you give in so easily the first time, of course they're gonna come back. You an easy mark. Man, I don't know. I grew up around too many hustlers. This don't make no sense. Of course, he was going to come back and try to hustle you some more. All that man knows how to do is strong arm folks and not pay them, get you to pay him, and then make you have to eat the fact that he will not live up to the end of the bargain. So now, what do? The Department of Education wants to make a compact for academic excellence and higher education. Okay, and yes, they are trying to make the institution intentionally more conservative, and we're going to talk about that just right now, Jazz. So this compact for academic excellence in higher education, right, is some bullshit. But it is a perfect example of the ways that the only way the state can maintain its authoritarian power is by infiltrating the cultural lexicon, y'all. So you got to get into the education. You see how it's not just bullets, but it's actually brain, right? This is a cultural war. It's a spiritual war as much as it is a mundane on the ground war. So they're going for our higher ed because when you can control the population's education, right, then you can control the citizenry because an educated citizenry is dangerous. It is absolutely dangerous. I just put up a lecture on my Patreon that I did for the last class I taught actually at Brown. Funny enough, y'all, the last two classes I taught at Brown were about race, nation, and higher education. And then, is the U.S. university worth saving? Reimagining new futures in higher ed. I did this in 2020. You could see it in 2020, the writing on the wall. You can actually see it in 2016 because of the ways of research were showing before even all of this wave of COVID and even before the height of Black Lives Matter, and then now these authoritarian regimes taking over, it was already being purported that there was going to be a drastic downturn in enrollment in a lot of the four-year universities because there weren't going to be enough people. There just weren't enough people, literal enough students to populate these places. So there was already concerns about being able to sustain a lot of these institutions. And that's why a few of them closed so quickly during the lockdowns in the kind of Northeast, so small liberal arts schools, because there were so many of these schools that were tuition driven. If you don't have the people to actually come in and you have to give 70% of your students significant financial aid, it's not a sustainable model. So we were already seeing the unsustainability of higher education and its model before all of this shit came in. That's really important to remember. Okay. So then now you've got a bully in power who put in literally the wife of the man whose whole career and business is built upon fake, but also real fake wrestling, right? So literally being a bully and making money off of that. Of course, they're going to keep strong arming y'all. And so now this compass for economic excellence and higher education, or this compact, I should say, is to bring together top tier universities to make an agreement to do things that the government says they should do. And if they do it, they'll get preferential treatment for funding and other things. And if not, then they'll have things removed from them. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's in the goddamn language itself. So, what are the things they want them to do? So, I wrote them down, or I copied them actually from a few articles that were reporting on this, excuse me. So this compact wants a ban on consideration of race and sex in hiring and admission processes. It wants to freeze tuition for a 5-year period, which is really interesting. Limit international undergraduate enrollment to 15% of the student body, and that had to be undergrad because majority of a lot of graduate programs in the U.S. Are international students. So it's interesting they said undergrad. They want to commit to institutional neutrality. Okay. We want to require applicants take standardized tests again. So bring back the SAT and ACT, which is nothing more than a goddamn scam, y'all. Those are an industry that was created whose that testing does not actually and has never really indicated student success once you get into higher ed, but that doesn't matter. They want to clamp down on grade inflation. I don't even know what the hell that means. They want to ensure a quote vibrant marketplace of ideas on campus. They want to restrict employees from expressing political views on behalf of the institution. They want to shut down departments that punish, belittle, or spark violence against conservative ideas. Unanimously poll students and employees on compact compliance and publish the results. And they want these institutions to deploy their endowments to the public good so that they're not charging tuition to students who are pursuing hard science programs or for universities with more than 2 million per undergrad students in endowment assets. So then universities will be required to post more details about graduate earnings and refund tuition to those who drop out in their first semester. So there's a couple of things in here that randomly do make sense, but they don't make sense in the context of everything else. So you got to be very weary because a lot of this is aimed to shut down any supposed kind of quote unquote DEI, but also to make it easier for conservative values to be seen as more neutral in stance so that they infiltrate and into the kind of foundation of the institutions. And so they asked the 9 universities to sign the compact are Brown, Dartmouth, MIT, University of Arizona, University of Pennsylvania, University of Southern California, University of Texas Austin, the University of Virginia, and Vanderbilt. Okay, those are the ones that were asked to join. So far, Texas has enthusiastically said that they would be happy to be part of the compact. The other universities have not responded. Okay. Yes, this is exactly, Jazz. It's exactly why Turning Point was always a problem. And the university allowing that shit to go through 10 years ago opened the door for this. Opened the door for this, right? Because you didn't live up to your own methodology. You didn't believe your own goddamn raps. You cannot say that the methods and the methodologies that one learns through these institutions, especially these so-called elite institutions, that you've got to go through all this training to do, that you have to show and continuously prove your value and worth in, right? After all this training, to say that you will then allow that training to go up against, quote unquote, somebody who couldn't even make it past the first semester. And somehow y'all are on so-called equal footing. Well, then you don't believe your own goddamn methodology. You don't believe your own so-called innovation and elitism. You don't. You just completely sullied it. And so this is what happens when you don't understand diversity. Let's go to the DEI craze. Now, I'm going to say this, and it actually is a lot of a lot, I guess, new fucking nuance. There's gonna be a lot of things at the table that I'm gonna put at the same time, y'all. Okay. People like to say nuance, and that's another way I think of neutrality. It's really been warped into that. My thing is a lot of shit sits true at the same time. So you gotta stop trying to put it into a hierarchy. You gotta lay that shit flat and figure out the webs. You gotta figure out the webs of things, y'all. Stop stacking shit, start laying it flat, and figure out where the different satellites are at. Okay. A lot of my work got pushed into DEI. I talk about this a lot on various other kind of videos, especially in the Patreon. I come out of graduate school in 2012, and my focus is on the relationship between race, nation, and the state. And again, my field work was in the UK. I was in Bristol working in a Black, Asian, minority ethnic organization, and I was examining racialized citizenship, how Black, Asian, minority ethnic folks via organizations can engage their rights with and are denied their rights by the state. Now, when I was doing the dissertation field work, that was at the time that the coalition government was constructed, and the Green Party's dumbasses went with Tories, and it decimated the economy and opened up the gates for austerity measures, and we now see where England is today. We are no different, y'all. I'm not even talking shit about them. It's more about they become the location of what we will become because we are begot by them. So if we look at the mess of that island and the different prime ministers and the ways that neither party can get their shit together, that was showing us what we were going to go through, which we are going through right now. Okay. Now, when I got out, there were no jobs. This is the economic downturn was bad. Like we are in the midst of the dollar being shit. Higher ed had done a lot of cuts, and those who were hiring, the focus for the few years was mostly focused on things like water rights and gender analysis and a couple of other kind of key things that people were not hiring for folks who did any work in the Western world who were doing work around race and nation. It was dry. So that's why I went into administration because I applied to a bunch of different things. Now, because of the work I was doing and because I worked within Black, Asian, minority ethnic organizations and I examined race, when I was hired as the McNair director at Beloit College, all of a sudden I was put on all of these DEI initiatives and I was getting irritated. And I would say, why am I doing one? My time is actually 100% this grant. So I need to actually focus on the damn scholars and revamping the program because the director who had left, y'all, this bitch took everything, including the goddamn hard drive. And I didn't even know I had to teach a class that night until my former boss told me a day before I was moving to campus. Like when I say higher ed can be a mess and a goddamn shit show and there's no onboarding, it's literally my whole career. I have never been onboarded. That's why I was so adamant when I brought staff on to make sure that there was a clear onboarding process because no one needs to be thrown into the wolves like that, right? That's what they do. They throw you into the wolves, make you be grateful for the scraps they give at the table. And then when you make that damn table a fucking feast, they want to take credit for the feast and tell you that you're the goddamn problem. Don't do that shit, y'all. Believe the spaces you are in and move accordingly. Okay. So when I was there trying to revamp the program, had to teach this class, we did a bunch of things. I also had to write the grant in 2 years' time. So I had to make sure that we were hitting our actual targets so that we could have the points to renew the goddamn grant. Okay. I'm getting put into all this DEI stuff and I'm getting irritated because I say, one, I don't do diversity, equity, and inclusion. I look at the construction of the human. But that's exactly what DEI is. And its full core and foundation is the ways that we cannot see our humanity, the humanity of others. So everything needs to be just kind of placed upon getting a Black or brown or queer or some other marginalized body to make the space feel good, but don't do a goddamn thing. So because I got pushed into all of this, and then long story short, I ended up making an office and having to hire a whole new staff and got quote unquote promoted. But all that promotion was me doing the work that my associate dean and provost should have been doing, but couldn't do. But because they thought they were white and special, they thought that just hiring somebody else doing it for them meant that they did the work. I know plenty of folks have that story too, right? What I really found out when I had to do this work and do it my way is that there is such a disdain and a misunderstanding of what diversity is at its core that there is no way for us to get free because we are afraid of our own inner diversity. What do I mean by this? Diversity got reduced down to a bunch of checkboxes, right? This kind of enumeration, which is nothing more than a replication of how we understand how to mark the body. This goes back to Linnaeus, y'all. It really does. Linnaeus, who constructed the whole kind of genius and species categorization that then categorized all the world, including humans. Okay. This is the way that the Western mind, Western knowledge production functions, is through categorization, right? It has to reduce things down, hence this binary. So applying that now then to trying to fix structural problems that aren't actually ever really addressed, all you're doing is putting shit upon a cracked foundation. And that's what a lot of diversity initiatives were. Okay, listen to what I am saying. A lot of diversity initiatives were just putting shit on top of cracked foundations, not actually examining and breaking the cracks to remake those foundations. Because when you just want to checkbox something and say we just need to put X amount of people in, right, or we need to hit a certain quota, that does not mean that the criteria is somehow less than. It means, though, that the ways in which you are understanding the structures itself to begin with are off. So you are going to bring a qualified person in, especially a qualified Black or brown person in, but you will not have any space to hold them. So any changes they do make to that space, they'll be able to see those cracks, because you ignore those cracks means that when they crack through, break through, and help construct a new stage, you didn't want change, right? You wanted to feel good and check that box. You hear what I'm saying, y'all? You hear what I'm saying? That's why I push back on diversity, because I said you cannot bring Black folks into a space that I know will eat them alive, because they will be too good for the space. And by too good, I mean they'll actually be able to see it. You'll be able to see it. And because you can't see yourself and somebody is showing a mirror, that becomes a projection, right? And a projection upon a marginalized body in a white supremacist space is deadly. It is violence. And it will always make us feel as if we were inadequate and incompetent. No, we are inadequate because we cannot hold incompetency. Very different. Diversity. So, because we can't really understand and hold diversity, and we have been trained to become individuals, that is also anti-diverse, because to be an individual means you buy into a script, you perform a script, right? The identity put upon you. When you deviate from that script, it doesn't matter the race, they'll do it worst internally. Okay, when you deviate from that script, then you become the problem, because now you are showing diversity within a group. We don't know how to hold diversity. So because we can't hold diverse ideas, diverse thoughts, diverse concepts, right? Ideas of neutrality start to appear, start to seem as if that is the best way to go, because it does not allow us, right, to sit in the uncomfortableness of what diversity brings. It will require an actual knowing, an actual praxis, an actual kind of method to figure out how these diverse ideas, diverse populations, diverse needs can then be met under one structure, right? Yes, it's exactly benevolent assimilation. Right. And that's actually a lot of the inclusion. A lot of inclusion stuff was actually assimilation, just in a new form. Okay. That's why I really pushed back. I didn't use inclusion a lot in a lot of my work. I talked about diversity and equity as a way for us to understand humanity. Let's go back to the human then. So when a lot of my work got relegated to diversity, equity, inclusion, and I refused to do that kind of work, because all that work did was make me and my staff sick, like physically sick, because of all of the energy, all of the projections, all of the things that they were just putting upon our bodies. And again, I'm 6'3". So when I walk into a room, people are seeing a 6'3" Black woman. So you think that I can even hold more, right? The bigger the body, the more, and especially the bigger the body. And if I was darker skinned, especially, like, I also understand the intersections that I occupy. Right. There is this kind of expectation that the bigger you are outside of a white body, that you can just be holding more. You are a mule. I got tired of being a mule because my body could not handle it. My back literally broke. Right? The body does not lie. And I learned that studying and examining actual bones, right? So going into that space, having had the background and training from these spaces about the human, about human diversity, about this idea that race is not biologically real, because genotypically doesn't make any sense, because there's more diversity within a population than between, because we need diversity of genetic material to ensure the sustainability of a population. Right? So at its core and essence, to be human is to sit in diversity that then understands how to be in relationship to one another and the environment that they are in. Well, then when we're talking about then DEI and I'm looking at the construction of the human, I said the only way I can do this work is talking about what does it mean to become human again. right? Because people couldn't handle diversities within themselves. They couldn't they couldn't handle their own kind of contradictions. So when you can't handle your own contradiction and you have rested your kind of foundation on stories, on concepts, on understandings of the past that shape your present, that then give you a predetermined future, and somebody comes in and shakes that foundation on purpose or on accident, and you're not used to sitting in that self-reflection, sitting in the body that is going to have a reaction, well, then the first thing you learn to do, because we live in a racial capitalist society that says that the non-white, non-straight, non-male body is the problem, well, then you're going to project all that shit onto that body, onto me, onto my staff, since all of us occupied those different identities. I wish the fuck you would. All right. That back then I was just as fired with this as I am now. So I said I refuse. And so that's why we shifted, and I developed this concept called equity asset-based approach, in which we were asking people to turn the mirror around. Because diversity was not about bringing more bodies into a cracked foundation. Diversity was having us try to actually bring diverseness back into the equation, bring the human back into the conversation. But you can't do that when you refuse to acknowledge the past that led to the dehumanization to begin with. It was always going to be fucked up. So I said this then, I wrote about it then, and I want y'all to hear me when I say I'm speaking with this with nuance, not through a conservative lens, because there's a lot of conservative language uses this same lens, uses the same language, I should say, and manipulates it. I said 10 years ago, a lot of us did, that these goddamn DEI trainings that were required were going to lead us down a fucked up road in which they're going to manipulate this and turn this around and get people to start to have to sit through reorientations of, you know, the family again, or whiteness again, or something. Because you cannot force people to give a fuck about somebody else's humanity when they don't care about their own. You will force them into a kind of right-wing type of conservative talking points that make them feel good because they've been dehumanized so much from themselves, and they sat in that dehumanization. Any kind of feeling that makes them have to question will be seen as the enemy, because now they're going to have to face themselves. You got to start by bringing people back into their humanity, and that is not no love and light shit. That is some goddamn work. So here we are now, right? Here we are now. And I said that especially because in DEI overall, many of the people leading these goddamn initiatives weren't even from the margins to begin with. It was majority white women. And then after that, you got really, really small percentages of Black folks. And it usually ended up being straight Black men, then straight Black women, and then you got queer folk. Okay, we were like 1%. And I felt that every time I had to go and talk with the CDOs of different places and go to these ridiculous diversity conferences, right? That's why I refused those two, because it was a reproduction of a norm that they refused to actually interrogate. We were just reproducing it in a different font. Here we are now. When we don't tackle the floor, y'all, then we will end up reproducing it. Aries full moon, what is it illuminating about the ways we have compromised? Sun in Libra, we have compromised our senses of justice and relationships and self and culture in order to placate selves, placate an authority, right? That has done nothing but disrespect us over and over again. Racism is not a disease, y'all. It is a byproduct of what happens when your bloodline sell you out. When your bloodline sell out your bloodline to an energy, to an ideology, to a concept that never made sense to begin with, but fed you a pack of, a pot of lies, right? Fed you, glamored you so well that it sits in the DNA, it sits through the bloodline via the way in which we are taught to see ourselves in one another and how the family is constructed. Jupiter and Cancer, we have got to re-examine the ways, structures, and laws of governance and philosophy have shaped the ways we understand the family. Okay? Because it took that. It took bloodlines. It reshaped and reconstituted who could be called what, who was allowed to intermingle with who, right? And in doing so, it completely shifted the way we understand ourselves, one another, and where we come from. This is a time in which we're going to have to remake the family. All right. And this to me is also the retrograde of the outer planets, Pluto, Gemini, and Neptune retrograding, right? Aquarius, Uranus and Gemini, Neptune and Aries. We're going to have to reevaluate and reconceptualize the ways that we think about, enact, and understand the foundations of how we have constituted these structures of society. And since society in these economic systems relies upon a narrowed, nuclearized version of the family, so that people learn their scripts early on and are groomed into those scripts so that you can become docile workers in one way, shape, or form for the state, right? We have to take that back. So you got to take back what it means to the family. Okay. All right, y'all. I done yapped long enough. Let me know what comes up for you in the comments below. If you are on the Patreon, this recording will be on there later tonight. And if you are not at the groundscape level or higher, there will be a smaller or condensed version of this available on the Patreon for free and also on my YouTube channel. And I will be coming back weekly to do the show. I like this format more. It allows me to flow and not get into my own Virgo and try to make everything quote unquote perfect or quote unquote right. We just got to flow. Okay. Now, next week, we got some things going on. So we're going to talk some more. Okay. Next week, we get Venus moves into Libra, right? So it's going to be in its home sign, and Mars is in Scorpio, its home sign. So the personal planets are going to get real personal, but Venus is going to be opposing Neptune as soon as she does that. So we're going to talk about the ways that the personal will get political, literally, and the political is personal as we see these kind of transits happening before the new moon in Libra on the 21st. All right. And as always, if you would like a reading with me, you can, I've got my 1 hour readings are 35% off until the end of October. So use code FALL in order to apply that. And if you're in Chicago, like I said, come see your girl. Either you can shake some ass and watch yourself at the 40 Plus Mixer at Nobody's on the 16th, or at Funk Stick on the 19th and get an astrology reading. And if you want to be part of the Queering Chaos Project and the conversation, come out on the 21st of October as the first of 5 Queering Chaos conversations I am leading will begin, and we'll be talking about spirit and spirituality. And it will be every third Tuesday of the month. I will be having a Queering Chaos conversation until February. And we're going to be going over all different types of topics, all right? And I will be having more information on my Patreon and behind the scenes information about those conversations as well. So if you join the Patreon, you will be having access to that, okay? And I think that's it, y'all. All right. So thank y'all for joining me. I appreciate y'all's energy. I appreciate the comments. If I didn't get to you, I wasn't ignoring you. I'm just trying to do a both and try to figure out a flow. Okay. So I'll get better at this as we continue on. All right. But as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it is through the dreamscapes that we can bring the reality we say we want to bring into the present. All right. Till next time, y'all. One hand to heaven, the other pointed straight to hell. Right hand as strong as the left, dancing in the shadows with myself and the dead. The shadows on the walls, a mirror to the self. Why stay stagnant and allow the flames to consume you? Dance with them and conjure under the new moon. One hand to heaven, the other a guide to the other side where the dead reside. You gotta use both hands to feel your feet if you wanna defeat the demon masquerading as human.
Wandering, scratch that wandering, trying to find a meaning to it all. One is coming, but I ain't running. I'm just dancing with the shadows on the wall. To get to heaven, I went through hell, and now I see it all for what it is. Battling demons to fight for freedom, but surrender is the only way to win. Shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. Shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark.
Justice for the dead, life for the living. What is key is we need to sing a song of freedom from tyranny. One hand to heaven, the other conjuring the dead, who know the songs and actions of freedom that are needed for us in the times ahead.
Rage, define the age, and everybody's hiding from the truth. Stuck together for all alone, and haunted by the shadows in the room. But that's tomorrow's and yesterdays, racing to leave something behind. The end is really the beginning when you're dancing on the edges of time. The shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. The shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. The shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. The shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark.
One hand to heaven, the other in the underworld. Under the wood, the trunk of a tree, strong, sturdy, weather-bearing. Offerings laid, prayers are made. Now for the summoning. Dance with the shadows, songs erupting as lips and hips move to the drumming. One hand to heaven, the other on the other side. Justice for the living requires justice for those on the other side.
The shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. The shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. The shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. A shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. The light in the dark.
One hand to heaven, the other pointed straight to hell. Right hand as strong as the left, dancing in the shadows with myself and the dead. The shadows on the walls, a mirror to the self. Why stay stagnant and allow the flames to consume you? Dance with them and conjure under the new moon. One hand to heaven, the other a guide to the other side where our dead reside. Hear the ancestors call out. You gotta use both hands and feel your feet if you wanna defeat the demons masquerading as humans. Cause we've been here before. Time a loop of remembering and forgetting to remember once again. Of times before those shadows of former selves. One hand to heaven, the other to the past. That brought a present, a shell of the self. One hand to heaven, call down your head and dance in the light of self-knowing. The other hand extends down to the land, a remembrance, a signal to awaken the dead and rise up in glory. Hallelujah! Say their names and watch the shadows dance among the flames. Righteous justice, Libra, fully balanced.